Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, the worst outpouring of violence in South Africa since apartheid may have dissipated, but the socio-economic fallout of the insurrection has left a stain on the country that could last decades. Adedayo Ademuwagon, a consultant for Songhai Advisory, will be joining me from Lagos with an update on the deep discontent. And according to the latest figures from the World Bank, Nigeria's public spending on healthcare amounts to less than 4% of GDP, sparking an interest in the sector from foreign investors. I'll be speaking with Oluwasegun Oni, the co-founder of MDAS, about the growing opportunities for local healthcare startups. Abi Mustafa Maduwako, the CEO of AVCA, a body that promotes private investment on the continent, will also contribute to the investment discussion by sharing the findings from the firm's recent report. Then later, I'll be reporting on the biggest company stories of the week. But first, let's start the show with business news from here in the UK, where data released on Tuesday revealed that supermarket sales fell 1.6% year-on-year in the 12 weeks to June, as the reopening of the indoor hospitality took spend away from the grocers and into the nation's cafes and restaurants. Of the country's big four stores, Sainsbury's was the only one to register growth, which came in at 0.4%. In other British business news, on the same day that English nightclubs were finally given the green light to open their doors to clubbers, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced that venues will be legally required to prevent customers from entering their premises if they have not been double vaccinated. Vaccine hesitancy among younger people in the country is still a cause of major concern at a time when COVID cases are around 50,000 a day and still growing. The government's plans have been branded an absolute shambles by venues, backbench Tories and opposition MPs. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, Freedom Day hasn't gone according to plan. We've got three of the most senior politicians in isolation and a U-turn on access to nightclubs.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just three politicians, but also the leader of the opposition has just gone into isolation as well because one of his children has got it. And I saw someone on social media saying, does anyone have a child that isn't in some form of isolation? I'm not sure about you, Juliana, but it does seem to be, obviously, we've sort of predicted that the number of cases was going to go up as a result of rising infections and as a result of the easing of restrictions. And I think, various industry bodies are concerned and angry, even though many would say the Prime Minister and the government has done what many businesses wanted, which was to ease restrictions to try and get the economy moving. So, for example, nightclubs are angry, even though we saw those scenes on Sunday night, midnight, of everyone raving. I say everyone, young people raving. It's their first sort of time to let loose in 16, 18 months. But nightclub owners are angry that there's now going to be these vaccine passports that young people are going to have to be able to go to nightclubs. They're going to have to show that they've been double vaccinated. Figures show that 35% of 18 to 30-year-olds have not had their first jab yet, so that would be the nightclub, the night economy missing out on quite a few people. There's been quite a bit of confusion over what's being called as the pingdemic. This is when you're pinged on your NHS app to say that you need to go into isolation, and the confusion lies whereby the government's saying that it's crucial for people who've been pinged that they need to go into quarantine, but that's only after a minister said that it was actually up to the individual or the employer as to whether they had to go into isolation. And even that came a few days after Boris Johnson himself was pinged, and he said, actually, I'm not going to go into isolation, I'm going to take part in this pilot project, which caused a lot of uproar, and then there was a U-turn. So I think there's a lot of confusion, as there often is. All of these things are being sort of done on the hoof, and a lot of people are saying, how can you make this any more chaotic than it already is? There are a couple of companies as well that are saying that they're really struggling to keep going because a number of their employees are being called into isolation. So Iceland, the supermarket, Green King, the pub chain, both saying they're going to have to close lots of shops as a result of losing staff to this. Medical community obviously coming out saying, a lot of them saying this is bonkers that we are opening up so fast. A microbiologist saying he feels exasperated, saying that higher cases will put more strain on testing infrastructure, which is obviously so important. But I want to just sort of caveat this by saying that around the world, many countries are going through the exact same thing. You know, there's protests in Australia at the moment because of new lockdowns there that we've been reporting on recently. The French have reacted really angrily to COVID passports needed to get into restaurants. And also in the Netherlands, there's a lot of rioting that's been going on as a result of. So we are going through the same kind of things other countries. We may be doing a bit more extreme by opening everything up so fast.
Yes, we'll wait to see what the update is next week. Thank you, Simon, as always. Let's change gear now and focus our attention on the recent uprisings in South Africa, which has led to the death of more than 215 people. The mayhem is the worst outpouring of violence since apartheid. Vaccination sites have been shut, thousands of businesses have been wrecked, and vandals have attacked infrastructure, including industrial warehouses and more than 100 telecommunications towers. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Adedayo Ademowagun, a consultant for Songhai Advisory. He joins me now from Lagos. Adedayo Ademowagun, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. The violence does appear to have dissipated slightly, but what we witnessed in South Africa over the past couple of weeks is some of the most violent uprisings we've seen since apartheid. Of course, there are hotspots across the continent, and it's never just one thing, but what was it about Zuma's recent sentencing that revealed the glaring issues that South Africa has with law and order?
Thank you very much, Juliana, for having me on your show. I think the way to put it is to say that there was perceived weakness in public order, and that's what emboldened more people to act unlawfully. So this is it. South Africa doesn't have a great history in dealing with demonstrations and rioting and civil disobedience, that kind of stuff. Remember Marikana massacre in 2012? Marikana is a place in the northwest province. It's just next to the Gauteng province where the recent unrest occurred. So in 2012, miners in that part of South Africa were protesting, they were demanding better pay, and police killed them. So fast forward to 2021, law enforcement are looking at what's going on right now, what appear to be legitimate demonstrations, and they were very reluctant to get involved in that, given the precedent in Marikana, for example. So as a result, there was a gap in law enforcement, and some violence crept in that situation. And, it's the broken window effect. People were watching this stuff on their TV and on their social media. They can see people storming shopping centers unchallenged. They can see roadblocks. They can see bonfires. And it created the perception that there was a breakdown in law and order. And the broken window effect. When people think that there's been a breakdown in law and order, it usually leads to more breakdown in law and order. So that's what happened in South Africa in the last 2 weeks, Juliana.
Absolutely. With over 200 people dead, there's been so much destruction. There's been arson. Thousands upon thousands of businesses have been destroyed. Many of them will never reopen. A lot of analysts suggest it's going to potentially take decades for the country to recover from this. How does the recovery start? I know that's a jam question, as someone would say, on the ground, but what can Cyril Ramaphosa do?
Yeah, well, of course, even before COVID, there were some very, very severe structural problems that the government had to address. But let's start with the short-term situation, COVID-19. I mean, it's perhaps the main impediment, before short-term, recovery and post-unrest, stability and things like that. Since last year, the government has been setting some very stringent lockdown measures. For example, recently there was a 2-week lockdown extension and things like that. And these lockdown measures have had some very, very serious social and economic consequences. So for example, in 2020, last year, GDP shrank by 7%. Unemployment rose from 29% in 2019 to 32% in 2020. And understandably, people were very unhappy about this sort of situation. I mean, look at the UK, for example, just about 90% of adults have already been vaccinated. In South Africa, not so much. People were unhappy about the slow pace. It was slow, there's momentum now, but people were unhappy about the slow pace of vaccination in South Africa, the state of the economy, and of course the disruptiveness of this whole lockdown thing. And that actually contributed to the unrest that we saw recently in this country, because this is it, on June 27, because of the third wave and this COVID situation, the government had to put the country back into lockdown for 2 weeks. That was June 27. On July 11, the president went on air and announced that this 2-week lockdown will be extended for another 2 weeks. Public gatherings were banned, restrictions on liquor sales and things like that. people were very unhappy about that. And the rioting appeared to intensify from the same night that President Ramaphosa made that announcement on July 11th to extend the lockdown. The rioting appeared to intensify. So, we're talking about long-term, we're talking about stability here. We're talking about economic recovery. For the government to be able to do these things, first, it's going to have to sort out this COVID impediment. We're already seeing some momentum on that note, I have to say. For example, at the start of June, only 1 million South Africans have been vaccinated. That's more than 5 billion South Africans. So we're seeing things are moving very quickly in the right direction in that department.
Adedayo Ademuwagan, a consultant at Shanghai Advisory. Thanks for joining me on the show. Now to our next story. The African Private Equity and Venture Capital Association is a pan-African industry body which promotes and enables private investment on the continent. According to the firm's most recent report, startups in Africa are changing the economic landscape and creating new market opportunities, with venture capital in localised firms reaching over $1 billion last year alone. Abi Mustafa Maduwako, the CEO of AVCA, joins me now from London for more on this. Abi Mustafa Maduwako, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. We've all seen the social media stories. African startups are doing pretty well and they've raised lots of money over the past couple of years. Your recent report suggests that resilience and resurgence on the continent is what's driving this investment. How important were these attributes last year when investors were so fearful because nobody knew where the pandemic would be taking us?
Thanks, Juliana. And firstly, thanks for having me. So I think you captured it perfectly with the resilience and the resurgence of the African economy. So last year, quite frankly, it was a year of uncertainty, not just in Africa, but across emerging markets in general. But what was fantastic about what startups did last year was they started to innovate. And we started to see investments that ordinarily we haven't seen outside of COVID. And one that I will mention is the acquisition of Paystack by Stripe, which was at the height of the pandemic. So that was very encouraging. And I think that signaled to a lot of international investors that Africa is still open, the startups are still innovating, that we're still developing homegrown solutions to the myriad of complex challenges that are occurring on the continent. So I think in spite of the year generally being slow, I mean, you can see from our report that African startups were able to raise 1.1 billion in 2020. And I mean, yes, that's been a little bit of a dip from the year before by 400 million. But when you contextualize it amidst all of the economic recession that was happening because of COVID, you can see there was quite a successful year for the startups. So I think what that signaled was, we were still innovating. Businesses were still coming out and they were still able to raise funding, which is very important. And finally, the most important thing is the international and domestic investment community still backed startups in Africa and still believed in the potential of the startup businesses on the continent.
Absolutely. You mentioned Stripe's acquisition of Paystack. That got everybody, including me, excited. It was such a mammoth acquisition. And again, within your report, you do mention the trends of copycat solutions. Where has this come from and how have investors learnt from challenges in the past, rather than trying to copy and paste what they're doing in the global north, in the global south, now saying actually it's much easier to kind of leverage off what has already been created locally?
So I think that's testament to the quality of the businesses that have been developed locally. Because Africa, as we know, it's the most fantastic continent, and I rarely like to refer to it as just saying Africa, because we know it's made up of 54 very diverse countries. But I think what investors have started seeing is you can't necessarily just take a product that you've seen in global north and just place it in global south. It needs to be developed bottom up. We as Africans or people on the ground, we understand the complexities and the challenges that are being faced on the continent. So that's why homegrown solutions are really important. And that's why we've seen them be successful. For instance, we mentioned in our report, the Heat riding app. It's becoming fantastic on the continent. The likes of Uber, they have gone in and they've done quite well, but there's still room for us to develop our own homegrown solutions. And we're seeing that not just in logistics, we're seeing that in fintech, a lot in fintech actually, but we're seeing that in the healthcare sector as well. So to your point about how investors have learned that it's better to just back some of the existing players on the continent, I think it's just, like I said earlier, it's just a testament to the quality of businesses that are coming out.
Abi Mustafa Maduwako, the CEO of AVCA, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global today. Coming up on Channel's Business Global, I'll be discussing Africa's healthcare investment drive with Oluwasegun Oni, the co-founder of MDAS, who will be joining me from Lagos. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a few minutes, I'll be discussing Africa's healthcare investment drive with Oluwasegun Oni, the co-founder of MDAS. But before then, here's some company news for you. Zoom Video Communications has agreed a deal to buy the cloud software provider Five9 Inc. for almost $15 billion. This is the video conferencing startup's first major acquisition, and it's the second biggest American tech deal this year, behind Microsoft's planned $16 billion purchase of Nuance Communications. The deal is intended to help expand Zoom's offering as it prepares for the post-pandemic slowdown following its explosive growth in 2020. In the 12 months to the end of January, Zoom's annual sales quadrupled to $2.65 billion, and its share price has risen more than 400%. Five9 has seen rapid growth of its own as demand has surged for call center technology that would allow representatives to do their jobs from home. The transaction is expected to close in the first half of 2022. LVMH is acquiring a 60% stake in Off-White, the luxury streetwear brand that designer and DJ Virgil Abloh founded in 2013. As part of the deal, Abloh will be working across LVMH's non-fashion sectors, including wines and spirits, ensuring the group attracts more diverse voices to its variety of brands. The acquisition marks a new stage in the evolution of LVMH, which has emerged from the pandemic with an attractive balance sheet. Its share price is up 60% this year, and revenues in Q1 are up 30% year on year. Abloh is currently the artistic director of Louis Vuitton menswear. UBS has reported a surge in second quarter profit as the world's largest wealth manager reaped the benefits of buoyant markets and a boom in mergers and acquisitions. The Swiss lender's earnings climbed 63% to $2 billion, comfortably surpassing the $1.35 billion analysts had forecast. Revenue beat expectations in the bank's four main divisions, while pre-tax profit increased across all four of its geographical regions. And to our next topic now. According to the latest figures from the World Bank, Nigeria's public spending on healthcare amounts to less than 4% of GDP, sparking an interest in the sector from foreign investors. With the weakness of healthcare infrastructure being laid bare during 2020, tech startups within the region are reaping the benefits from their scalable, localized solutions. For more on this, I'm now being joined by the CEO and co-founder of MDAS, Oluwasegun Oni, who joins me in Lagos. Oluwasegun, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Before the break, we were actually speaking to the CEO of AVCA, and their recent report found that over £1 billion has been pumped into Africa in 2020 alone. And you're one of the lucky ones. You managed to get some cash in your recent seed funding. How is your latest round of investment going to plug the massive gap we have in healthcare when it pertains to Nigeria?
Thanks for having me. Of course, the infrastructure deficit in the healthcare sector in Nigeria is massive, right? And we raised about 2.3 million. And so that's not going to fix all the problems in the healthcare sector in Nigeria. But what we can show is that we can build healthcare infrastructure in a very efficient way, and in a very sustainable way, and also in a way that it can scale. So, and as we grow, as we raise this money to keep building infrastructure and keep proving that our model works, we think that we would actually get more funding to be able to even scale that even more to more places.
Absolutely. Given the size of the population, Shoga, I think Nigeria's done pretty well when it comes to COVID. Obviously, I'm sitting here in London, but you definitely have done better than UK case numbers. Would you say that digital healthcare, which has obviously surged in 2020, do you think that has done a lot to alleviate some of the pressure? Tell us how your work has helped alleviate some of the COVID concerns.
Absolutely. We think that having virtual care or digital care, as you might call it, really helped a lot. If you remember last year, a lot of things were locked down. And so people weren't able to go to the hospital like they used to go to the hospital, right? And having this access to like a virtual way to access their doctor was quite important. And also, as the isolation centers started getting filled up, and I think that that's the promise of digital healthcare, where you can, sit at home and get some of you need, and you can even have a doctor come home to you. So for us at MDAS, one of the things that we did last year was we did a lot of COVID screenings. We ran some sample collection sites, and we were testing people for just both COVID and a lot of the underlying conditions for COVID. And what we realized was that the COVID situation in Nigeria was actually better than most countries. The caseload was definitely better. But what we saw was that a lot of people had underlying conditions, undiagnosed hypertension, diabetes, that they didn't know. And this was a problem area. So what we did was actually created another product called Sentinel X to tackle that particular problem, where we get people access to personalized preventive care. They can come in, screen themselves, and then we'll give them access to a doctor year round. And this happens via digital tech, via your cell phone, via an app. So
sounds like a winning solution, and I know you certainly helped save the lives of thousands, and which is why you've been so successful in your recent funding round. Shoga, according to PwC, Nigeria alone loses $1 billion every single year to health tourism. I know just around the corner from where we are, Harley Street is a frequent a place that those with lots of money in their back pocket from Nigeria go to attend. How does DigiHealth kind of bridge the gap? Can it bridge the gap? Or are there going to be some that still want the best doctors in Dubai, India or London?
Yes. So people getting out of Nigeria for care is nothing new, obviously. Even our president goes to the UK for his medical checkup. But I think the core problem is that, the healthcare infrastructure of this country has to be developed more. People have to be able to get the best care locally. And maybe, some people might still need to travel out, but it would be for really, really specialized like diseases where they're trying to treat. But for us, one of the things we're looking at is how can we actually build like an healthcare infrastructure or healthcare facilities that people want to come to even in Nigeria and feel like they get the best quality, they get the best healthcare outcomes in those places. And even if you look at it carefully, like, if we're spending 1 billion outside the country, there's a lot of people who cannot even afford that 1 billion that also don't have access to the same infrastructure. So we think that if we can democratize access to high quality healthcare infrastructure, high quality healthcare facilities, really great doctors coming back to Nigeria to practice, and even stemming down on the brain drain a little bit, that it will be a better solution for everybody.
Absolutely. Before I let you go, Shoga, I want to ask about the sustainability for firms such as MDAS, even Netflix. They are struggling to hold on to some of their subscribers because consumer habits have now changed. We were all locked down. Now we're coming back out again. What do you think is the future of telehealth? Just very briefly, please, before you go.
I think that telehealth, the activities that happened in the past 18 months in telehealth has been amazing. I think COVID definitely accelerated a lot of the development, a lot of the innovations happening in telehealth. I think in Nigeria and also outside Nigeria. And what this COVID situation did for is open people's minds into this is an option for me. Telehealth is an option for me now. back in the day, if you wanted to do telehealth, people would tell you that, hey, I'd rather just go and see you face to face, right? But now people see that as a valid option to get care. I think that one thing we have to make sure is that we have to make sure that the healthcare outcomes for telehealth services are also as good, if not better, than also physical services. I think that if that healthcare outcomes is not the same, then people would fall back to what they used to do. But if we can prove that it's better for you to go access a doctor via your phone, via an app, and then you necessarily don't need to be in an hospital for like basic care, then I think that that's a good thing. And I'm looking forward to how this whole telehealth thing kind of scales in the future.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to hearing about your scalability in that next successful round of seed funding. Oluwasegun Oni, co-founder of MDAS, thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global, and good luck. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.